Well, that's right. I've been working on this since, probably 2002, 2003, started in New Hampshire. And there are really two tracks on it. One is a more advanced track where a state could actually adopt an alternative currency. Gold and silver is what we're promoting. And then the lower level, what I call the entry-level legislation, is for the state to recognize gold and silver coin, primarily United States gold and silver coin, as legal tender under state law, and to recognize the validity and enforceability of what's called gold clause contracts, private contracts that involve payment in gold or silver as the sole medium of exchange. So that, the entry-level type legislation, is really what's beginning to catch on now. The other one is a little bit more complicated for the average state legislator. And we have a bill in South Carolina.
Yeah, well, I want to talk a little bit about that, or more detail when we get back from this break about both the impetus for this movement towards alternative currencies and legally what it means. I mean, especially without the cooperation of the federal government, how far these initiatives can actually go in moving commerce in the United States off of fiat and back to, species and real money. So we'll discuss that when we get back. You've been listening to the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com. Don't go anywhere.
And explode, forget what they told. No way, I'm gonna go nowhere. I'm going old on this rap madness, homie. It's black magic. I know you want
The Peter Schiff Show.
Ain't nobody gonna bring it like we do. Tell me how you living, are you keeping it secret?
Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million. Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. I'm speaking with constitutionalist lawyer Edwin Vieira regarding gold and silver, and we're talking about the movement through many of these United States to move on a state level anyway towards an alternative medium of commerce, the use of gold and silver as an alternative to Federal Reserve notes. And welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, so first of all, let's talk about what can be accomplished here on a state level, because if the federal government is going to tax any gains on gold or silver as ordinary income, doesn't that make it very difficult for gold and silver to circulate as in competition to, let's say, Federal Reserve notes, when you have the complication of having to establish a basis and every time anybody buys or sells something, triggering a taxable event that needs record keeping and reporting and things like that?
Well, that's exactly right. You have some transaction costs that are involved in using gold and silver. But on the other hand, people who are using it or will be using it are now providing themselves some insurance against monetary collapse, economic catastrophe. So it's kind of a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other proposition at this point in time. Now, as far as the states are concerned, of course, state use of gold and silver for state financial purposes is not subject to any kind of federal taxation. Any tax that might be involved at the state level, because the state legislature would remove. So one of the important aspects of this is beginning to move the states as entities away from the Federal Reserve System. When individuals start using gold and silver on a regular basis, what I think is going to happen when you have these alternative currency systems actually up and running, especially if the states are directly participating in them, then some kind of political deal is going to be made with the government in Washington along the lines of, you'll allow people to keep essentially 2 sets of books, a gold and silver set and a paper money set, and they will assess taxes on the gold and silver and pay it in gold and silver. They'll assess taxes on the paper and pay it in paper, so that you'll actually have a dual-track taxation system as well as a dual-track monetary system. And I think in the long run, the government in Washington might very well be forced into that, because it's going to be facing the same problems, monetarily speaking, fiscally speaking, as everybody else in the country, as the Federal Reserve System melts down.
Yeah, and I think it'd be very interesting if for state, because what a state could theoretically do is set up a depository for gold and silver. It could pay all of its employees that opt for it and all of the businesses that contract with the state. It could simply credit their accounts at this vault with gold or silver, and then give them a debit card that they could use, and then they can obviously take these debit cards. Merchants can sign up to accept them, and they can accept payment in gold and silver. They can open up accounts at these state depositories, and people could just move out of the paper system into a real system almost seamlessly with the use of a Visa or MasterCard debit card, and and depositories at at central vaults.
Well, that's exactly what I've been promoting since 2003, 2002, starting in New Hampshire. And the beauty of that system, if you run what's called the electronic gold or electronic silver system, all of the transactions are run through the depository, and one could imagine that a complete record would be kept of each transaction in terms of the amount of gold and silver that was exchanged and the value of that gold and silver at the time in whatever other currencies you wanted to use, Federal Reserve notes, euros, or so forth, so that many of these transaction costs that are related to accounting could be minimized simply in the process of using that system. And then, as you point out, debit cards, that's what the average person likes to use. He's not going to carry around gold and silver, and of course you don't have gold and silver banks dealing in coinage. But the debit card system would allow people to transition into this alternative currency in essentially a painless way because they're used to using that system now.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be painless for everybody. The government would feel a lot of pain. That's why I think that the federal government might resist it. In fact, the federal government might try to label anybody trying to use this system as a terrorist. So that they can go after them and prosecute them for domestic terrorism or counterfeiting, because the government needs desperately to hold on to this power. If you want to have this big social welfare state, if you want this enormous government, they need to finance it with printing paper money. And if people don't want that paper money that they're creating, then government loses a lot of power.
I think there's no question that there'll be a great deal of political friction as this mechanism goes into play. But we have to remember one thing, that the Supreme Court already ruled on this problem back in the late 1880s at the time of the U.S. Treasury notes, irredeemable Treasury notes, and ruled in two cases directly that a state can adopt an alternative currency, gold or silver coin, gold or silver bullion, things, in fact, non-monetary things, and Congress cannot interfere. Congress cannot tell a state what that state will use for its governmental purposes as its medium of exchange. So given those decisions, and actually given the state of the statutory law that's out there now, I don't think there's any question that the ball can start rolling here by the states picking up and beginning to use these alternative currencies.
What would be interesting to me,
people will come in the marketplace.
If we could see a governor stand up to the federal government and say, look, we've established gold and silver coin as legal tender. You can't tax it. You can't come in here and tell our citizens that if we pay them salary and then they take the money and buy a loaf of bread, that somehow there's an income, there's a gain between the time they collected their salary and spent it at the supermarket, and we're not going to let your agents come in to try to enforce some kind of phony income taxes on the mere expenditure of income that they've earned.
I think that's exactly what would happen. I think you'd have a political discussion from the state governmental level to the Treasury, the IRS, whoever it would be in Washington. Mm-hmm. Because lurking in the background here is if there were a federal challenge to what the states were doing, a state could bring a direct suit in the Supreme Court.
And then once that happens, then people will start, somebody will sell their house. I'm selling my house for ounces of gold. And then if someone buys a house in gold and they later sell it in gold, they'll eliminate their capital gains tax. I mean, if we can get the states on a gold standard, we eliminate the capital gains as it comes to inflation. Because right now the government collects capital gains taxes when they create inflation. That won't be the case if we go back to hard money.